Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. We thank you for this day. We pray that you will bless our time together this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to talk about truth lockdown, because I think that what we're going to see over the next 3 weeks until the election is going to be shocking. We saw some previews of that this week. I think it's only going to get worse. I have some examples. I think you know some of the examples I'm going to talk about. We talk each week about the convergence of events that we see happening. And again, each week is sort of an extraordinary week. I did an interview about some of the things that have been going on. Maybe talked about a couple things more in depth with my friend Tony from Minute to Midnight, who's from New Zealand, but he's in America because he came here and married someone, and so they're trying to decide if they can get back to New Zealand because they have pretty strict immigration rules there, and but the world is just, it's crazy. It seems like do you agree with me? That seems like there's like an outrage a minute. If not just every minute, it's like every 30 seconds I sit and I watch, and I'm just shocked. And I'm going to use this, a world disrupted, and can we fix this thing until the Lord returns, because I don't think that any of these things are going to get finished. And also a reminder that you can also find these updates at Remnant Truth Network, rtntv.org. And it may be that our time on YouTube is very limited. I saw that there were about a dozen YouTube channels that were, I would call them, they would sort of fall in the category of conservative to somewhat conspiracy theory and other, sort of that type of website, but they were just shut down this week. They were just locked out of their accounts, completely shut down. Some of them had, hundreds of thousands of subscribers. It's incredible to watch. So we've tried to set up this alternative platform because people are getting shut out of them. And these are sometimes Christian ministries that are, I don't agree with everything that they say. I'm sure they don't agree with everything that I say, but I think they're worthy Christian ministries to watch. And I see that they're having trouble with Vimeo and YouTube. And so the time on these platforms is very limited. We use some examples this week. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about here in a moment is that, excuse me one second here. I need to make a quick change to my slides so I don't look like a complete idiot. I'm sorry about this. I was copying slides and I overwrote some of the one and not the other. I use this verse almost every week now because I think it certainly has application to the church, but it also has application to the world at large. But specifically, Paul talking about the church near the end of his life, for the time will come, 2 Timothy chapter 4, for the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lust shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables. And Paul goes on to talk about, he's run the race, he's fought the good fight, he's ready to meet the Lord. And he also says in the next verse that, but watch thou in all things, Timothy, endure afflictions, do the working of evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry. And then he goes on to say that, I've done the best that I can. I'm ready to meet the Lord. And so Paul had this hope, that he was, whatever happened to him, he was going to be with the Lord. And I was struck, I was reading back, and that's not the right passage. This is not Judges, this is what's the book I'm trying to think of right now? Job, thank you. Job 19. I got the J right and the chapter. So anyway, look, Job has this great passage. I was thinking about it this week. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. Job chapter 19. Tremendous passage. Something that we can all look for, especially in the midst of a rather disrupted world. So let's look at a few things that are going on. I have some friends. I was actually out in Colorado last summer and spoke at a church within a couple hours of where they're having this giant fire. And I don't remember the name of the fire. It might be the Thompson Fire or something like that. And it's consumed now. It's the largest fire in the history of the state of Colorado. And it's interesting. I mean, are you even hearing news about this? No, it's just in the pictures that I'm seeing are just shocking, and towns are being evacuated. Even people are getting ready to leave Estes Park, which is at the entrance to Rocky Mountain National Park. And I'm hearing from, I believe this is the fire that I read about a month or so ago, and they said that they expected that it would burn until sometime in 2021. Part of it is because my understanding is there was a disease that went through and hurt a lot of the trees, and the trees are sort of dry brush now, and they're just burning like crazy. Ranches are being evacuated. They're getting the cattle and taking them. And again, it just goes to show you all this stuff is going on in the world, and it's not even talked about in the press, or it's ignored. Michael Ramirez, I think, is one of the better editorial cartoonists in the world. And he sort of did a play on the forest fires in California. Fires and bad policies are burning the state down. I think he's right. I saw a sign, there's billboards now appearing in Texas saying, when you vote, remember why you left California, because a lot of people have moved from California to Texas. See, the fear is, I think that, people will leave New York and come to Midwest or to Delaware County, where I live, and they'll vote like they did in New York, which is not really what we want. If you're gonna vote that way, just stay there and deal with the burning down of your society that you voted for. Take a little bit of responsibility for that. But they are moving. I have a friend, and he has a house, and a guy came in and offered him quite a bit of money, cash, close in a week on his house, as is. Of course, the response was, well, where am I going to move? Because So it was, but there are a lot of people moving. We have some in our neighborhood that moved here recently from New York. This is a report that came out by one of the UN agencies talking about the human cost of disasters, an overview of the last 20 years. And it's interesting just from the birth pangs standpoint of Bible prophecy to look at what this UN agency is talking about as what has happened from 2000 through 2019. Now, of course, they have an agenda. They're trying to show that all these disasters are coming about because of global warming and that sort of thing, but I'm not sure how earthquakes are affected by global warming. Nobody ever explains that. But you can see here in the chart on the left, there's all these reported disasters, total deaths, total affected, U.S. dollar economic impact. And so you can see in the first, the 20 years prior period, from 1980 to 1999, there were reported disasters. There were 4,200. In the last 20 years, there's been 7,300. So if you're watching the world and what's going on, and you're listening to these different prophecy updates, the number of people do, and everybody says it seems like there's more of XYZ happening, the answer is there really is more of XYZ happening. Things are happening at a much more rapid pace. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of the total disaster events by type, you can see that floods in 1980 to 1999 were 1,389, but in 2000 to 2019, there were 3,254. In other words, the number was 2.5 times the amount in the last 20 years as had been in the prior 20. Now, they're going to ascribe all of this to global warming, but there is also volcanic activity is up significantly, wildfires are up significantly, earthquakes are up significantly as well. It's not just because there's better reporting. It does seem like, well, there is something going on. Here's a little bit better chart. You can see, the number of people affected over the last 20 years, about half of the world's population, 4.03 billion. And then the total disasters by types. It's pretty amazing. And it does seem to comport with the fact that these things were predicted that they're going to happen prophetically. I don't have a lot of comments about Amy Coney Barrett, except that I thought that she was well prepared, gracious, articulate. I saw a study, you might remember in the Mike Pence, Kamala Harris vice presidential debate, they complained that Mike Pence cut off Kamala Harris twice. There's actually a video out there that you can find. Amy Barrett was cut off almost 6 times by senator, every one by a Democratic senator. The pro-woman Democratic senator, one thing you understand is that whenever the left accuses the right of something, that's what they're guilty of. They project everything. In her testimony, by the way, another clip that I would highly recommend that you look up is Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, who asked her some questions about the bonehead, or whatever term he used, professor who had said that that Amy and her husband had adopted 2 black children from Haiti so they could colonize them. And she was incredibly gracious. I'm sure she probably will make rulings that are disappointing at some point. Most judges do that. But I thought I was very impressed with the way she handled everything. In fact, she should get some kind of medal or statue or something of her, because she sat there and listened mostly to campaign speeches from Democratic senators. I mean, I think one of the senators, whatever that guy's name is from Connecticut, spoke the entire 30 minutes and never asked her a single question. And she had to sit there and listen to all that. That's the important thing. But during her testimony, she used the term sexual orientation. And the senator, I think this was Senator Hirono from Hawaii, she is not a very impressive person intellectually. She is pathetic. And she crawled all over Judge Barrett for saying sexual orientation, that's now an offensive term. Did you know this? I didn't know this. In fact, if you went a couple weeks ago, if you went to Merriam-Webster dictionary and you looked up preference, it said definition of preference, orientation, sexual preference. So guess what happened? Just guess what happened the day after Amy Coney Barrett used sexual preference. Merriam-Webster changed their dictionary definition to now it says definition of preference, an offensive use, orientation, sexual preference. Orwell never thought of this. This is way beyond what he even thought of. And it's the world that we live in. And I hate to break it to you, I don't think it's going to get any better. Things seem to disappear from the news. I'll come back to that. Now what we see happening is there are these reports. Europe is going back into lockdowns to fight the second or third wave of the virus. This thing has had an incredible impact on non-virus related things. This is a chart that I got from the Wall Street Journal that talks about what has happened to other medical conditions and treatments that are not COVID related. Do you see the drop in screenings for breast, lung, colorectal, pancreatic cancers, and that sort of thing? These are coming from statistics of the health, people just not getting treated. And now there's pretty good data that the deaths, non-COVID related deaths, are going up, spiking incredibly, and maybe worse than the COVID deaths, COVID-related deaths. So everybody's locking down. The economy is crazy. Here's a chart that shows the change in essentially foot traffic. This is from Financial Times. The change in foot traffic in various cities around the world. London, New York, and you can see all those charts up there, the red line, you see how the foot traffic fell dramatically when all these lockdowns started, and it still isn't anywhere back to near where it was. And then there's a chart here at the bottom that, here's a little bit better chart. No, that's the same chart. And at the bottom, it shows sort of a graphic of the fall in foot traffic, dark red is worse, in different center cities around the world, like New York City, London, and that sort of thing. You can see that people are not coming back. A lot of the major law firms in the U.S. are laying off staff. They are completely reorienting what kind of office space they're going to need in the future. This has an impact on big office buildings. The days when I interviewed with a Houston firm at one point, and it was a New York firm, they had just opened a Houston office, and they had come in and they had leased 50,000 square feet of office space for 25 years for 4 lawyers that they were opening the office with, because they anticipated growing. Well, the days that law firms are going to do, and any businesses are going to do things like this, are few and far between. I saw it in a news report the other night, I forget what state, I think it might have been NBC, talking about how people are leaving San Francisco. And the increase in the number of houses on the market in San Francisco are incredible, and rents have fallen like 35% from what they were a year ago, because everybody wants to leave. Who wants to live in a city like that if you don't need to, because you can work remotely. This is having a huge economic impact. And again, these lockdowns are coming. Now, I'm going to share, last week I shared with you a video clip of a member of the Ontario Parliament questioning the majority leader, I think, of Stephen Harper's party and the Parliament about what is the plan. Why did you send out this request for proposal for the construction of quarantine camps? Where are you going to put them? How many people what are the reason they're going to be there? People are going to be put there. How long will they stay, and how many people do you anticipate? And of course, he got no answer. And now this report, so I'm not sure that this report is entirely accurate, but it does sort of I think part of it is accurate. It's talking about the fact that they have big plans in Canada for these quarantine camps in 2021. And people that don't get the vaccine and that type of thing are going to go there. Now, I think some of the stuff is hard to believe. I have not been able to vet it. I'm only sharing it with you to tell you that there are plans. There is a plan for quarantine camps in Ontario and other provinces throughout Canada. I contacted some Canadian friends, and they said, we have not been able to verify this, but people are freaking out here in Canada having seen this. It was taken down off of this Canadian Report website. You can still find it at archive.org. Just like I was talking to someone yesterday, he was being pressured by some of his ministerial people who provide oversight to him about Black Lives Matter. He has spoken out against Black Lives Matter and social justice and that sort of thing. And the people in this particular church denomination have adopted it wholeheartedly. And he said, I wanted to show them what Black Lives Matter said about how they were anti-nuclear family and that sort of thing. But when I go to the Black Lives Matter website, it's been removed. It's gone. Why? Because people were figuring out that, hey, they're trying to change the truth. They're locking down the truth. But fortunately, if you go to archive.org, you can still, if you get the web page URL and paste that into the archive.org, it will pull up all the prior versions of the site. So it was sometime in September that Black Lives Matter removed all of this from their website and made what they are about much more generic. Why? Because they're trying to hide the truth. We know that this is a great article from the Australian Spectator talking about dangerous elites planning the Great Reset. We've mentioned this a number of times in the past. I think I first talked about it on April 1st. I did a special midweek update when this strategic intelligence website page was really released to the public by the World Economic Forum. And now the World Economic Forum has been pushing this Great Reset, which we've mentioned before. As this article says, dangerous elites planning the Great Reset. Davos 2021 will launch its own Green New Deal. Be afraid. And Maurice Newman, the author, says this in his article, a lasting side effect of COVID-19 is the universal growth of state power. Despite global death rates peaking last April and immunity building even without a vaccine, authoritarian leaders are clinging to their recently acquired powers. No doubt they view individual freedom as an optional extra, not to be an inalienable right, and want their new powers to become a normal part of governing. The Victorian government is legislating to that effect. And some people have shared with me the things that they're enacting in the state of Victoria in Australia, and it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. He goes on to say the response to COVID follows closely the approach taken by global warming activists But as Prince Charles puts it, the threat of climate change has been more gradual than the pandemic, but its devastating reality for many people and their livelihoods around the world and its ever greater potential to disrupt surpasses even that of COVID-19. He argues that we have a golden opportunity to seize something good from the crisis. And Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum and the Davos conference that takes place each winter, this is an article that he published this week, I believe. We must move on from neoliberalism in the post-COVID era. He says this in the article: the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. You hear this all the time. Reimagine this, reset. You're going to hear this a lot over this, particularly over the next, 90 days, 6 months, depending on how the election goes. All aspects, he says this, all aspects of our societies and economies must be revamped, from education to social contracts and working conditions. He labels this the Great Reset. He points to uneven access to healthcare, education, economic opportunities, and social progress, as well as to growing inequality among and within nations and racial and ethnic groups. At the center of these multiple crises lies the tension between privilege and meritocracy. Governments will need to intervene more, in other words, coerce people to ensure better and fairer outcomes from private investments. In short, he says, we need a great reset of capitalism. Now, in this Canadian report, that was one of the things that they talked about, was they were going to have to reset the economy. And supposedly the discussion was that they were just going to come in and wipe out all debts. Everybody's debt, mortgages and everything would be wiped out. Hey, that's great, right? Well, what's the downside? Yes. There is a downside. And the downside is this: you have to give up all assets. And you'll be given a universal basic income. Now, they've been trying to push this for a long time, and now all of a sudden, so regardless of how this COVID thing started and the pandemic and whether it was planned or intentional or whatever, there is no doubt that people with an agenda to control everything for their benefit are taking advantage of it. And it's a pretty stunning thing to watch. Here is what Klaus Schwab says in his article. COVID-19 has shaken the world in ways not seen since the world wars, affecting all aspects of human life. For the sustainable development of the planet, it's vital our recovery prioritizes new, greener ways to do business. The Great Reset offers an opportunity to reevaluate sacred cows of the pre-pandemic system, but also defend long-held values. And this is almost identical to what the Pope has said in his most recent encyclical, similar to what he said a few years ago in his encyclical Laudato Si, where he talked about Mother Earth. I wish I had a video. I don't have the image of it. Do you know that the Vatican minted a coin? And it's this South American goddess, fertility goddess, who's pregnant with the earth. This stuff is just absolutely shocking. Let me see my archive here and see if I have a copy of that. Now, I've copied too much over the last day, so you can look it up. The Vatican minted a coin with a fertility goddess who is pregnant with the earth. Okay, well, Brian's going to send it to me, so I'll try to talk to you while I do this. I'll talk a little bit about Klaus, and are you sending me email or text? Either one's fine. So here is what he says. Free market fundamentalism has eroded workers' rights and economic security, triggered a deregulatory race to the bottom and ruinous tax competition, and enabled the emergence of massive new global monopolies. We are way beyond they're trying to completely, this is what Obama said he wanted to do before he was inaugurated. We're just a moment away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. And it's true. It's just, what is going on is absolutely shocking. And the Times Spectator article goes on to say this, intense pressure will be applied to parliaments everywhere to pass enabling laws and to abdicate more responsibilities to unelected bureaucrats in global institutions. Crony capitalism is anathema to genuine market economies, and giving more leverage to those who encourage it is simply fascistic. No surprise that some of the global organizations behind the stakeholder capitalism push are accused of corruption, sexual harassment, cover-ups, and a general abuse of power. Still, the World Economic Forum's oligarchy derives much of its extraordinary influence and wealth from these same institutions, and no one should doubt their big brother intentions. Indeed, anyone who fears big government and values free speech, freedom to choose, and property rights should be terrified. Yet, so far, political, business, and church leaders, along with mainstream media, seem oblivious to the threat and turn blind eyes to the dictatorial abuses already perpetrated in the name of the pandemic. There is even bipartisan support for policies which 2 decades ago would have been considered politically and economically unthinkable. And this is exactly true. So, okay, hang on here. I got my crack staff, the team of 15 people that sit back there to feed me things each week. Here is the coin. Hang on one second. This is the Pope's. This is the Vatican coin. Now, you remember I played you a clip of this. They had this fertility goddess ceremony at the Vatican last summer. I'm almost to the point where I can't form the words to talk about this. The Financial Times yesterday, in one of their sort of op-ed editorial type articles, cited this as the week that austerity was officially buried. Back during the 2008 financial crisis, particularly with the country of Greece, they were forced to cut back on what they were spending. And now the International Monetary Fund is essentially saying, just spend. Just print money and spend. Now they say, well, don't go crazy. So I'm not sure how much crazier it could get. We're, running a budget deficit of something like $3 trillion in the U.S. so far this year. It's going to grow. They've just dumped like $8 trillion from the Fed into the markets. Everything is out of control. When Tony and I did our little Minute to Midnight show the other day, he talked about this circa theater in New Zealand called the Glitter Garden, a drag musical extravaganza for children, the first of its kind in the world. And if you look down at the bottom of the page, it says, suitable for all ages. Well, certainly this whole transgender thing is just a one-off. Nobody would really adopt the whole agenda, would they? Now, we had presidential town halls this week. I'm sure you probably have seen clips of them. By the way, if somebody has an extra supply of softballs, you might send them to ABC News because they seem to have run out of softballs. And it was shocking. It really was. It was supposed to be a town hall where citizens asked people questions. And Samantha Guthrie, who did the NBC town hall for President Trump, the best comment I saw was, okay, Samantha, if Joe Biden wins, you'll be the press secretary. You've got the job. Now just pretend you're a reporter again. It was inappropriate, but there was a question about this transgender issue that came up at the Joe Biden town hall. I want you to see this.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm the proud mom of 2 girls, 8 and 10. My youngest daughter is transgender. The Trump administration has attacked the rights of transgender people, banning them from military service, weakening non-discrimination protections, and even removing the word transgender from some government websites. How will you, as president, reverse this dangerous and discriminatory agenda and ensure that the lives and rights of LGBTQ people are protected under U.S. law?
I will flat out just change the law, eliminate those executive orders, number one. You may recall, I'm the guy who said, I was raised by a man who, I remember I was being dropped off. My dad was a high school educated, well-read man who was a really decent guy, and I was being dropped off to get an application in the center of our city, Wilmington, Delaware, the corporate capital of the world at the time. And these 2 men, I'm getting out to get an application to be a lifeguard in the African American community because there was a big swimming pool complex. And these 2 men, well-dressed, leaned up and hugged one another and kissed one another. I'm getting out of the car at the light, and I turned to my dad. My dad looked at me and said, Joey, it's simple. They love each other. The idea that an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child decides, I decided I want to be transgender. That's what I think I'd like to be. It'll make my life a lot easier. There should be zero discrimination.
Well, I will say this. He is sort of accurate in that he has zero discernment in being able to discriminate or discern between right and wrong. It's just absolutely shocking. And you remember it was about 2 years ago, maybe it's just a little over, it seems like, I think it was in 2019. He came to the Human Rights Campaign National Award ceremony right down the road in Columbus, and said that if he is elected, his number one priority, my number one priority will be put in place the Equality Act. And the Equality Act will eviscerate religious freedoms and the ability to exercise your religious freedom in the United States, if he has his way. It's very important. And he wants the European model where you have freedom of religion in Europe. They have freedom of religion as long as you keep it to yourself. You have to go along with the state religion. Well, speaking of Joe Biden, there was this report in the New York Post about some emails between Hunter Biden that seemed to confirm that Joe Biden, contrary to what he said, had meetings with people from Burisma. There are a number of videos. They found a computer of Hunter Biden's. He didn't pay. And so the guy, I don't know if it was subpoenaed by the FBI, but it seems to be clear that the FBI has had this thing for a long time. So while they're accusing the president of being in league with the Ukrainian oligarchs, they have a computer that shows that the other candidate was actually in league with the Ukrainian oligarchs. The response of this is sort of where I got the title for today, Truth Lockdown. Twitter and Facebook immediately started banning all posts from the New York Post, which is really when I think of the 5 most, it's in the top 5 in terms of circulation in the United States among newspapers. So it's not like it's, some little weekly newspaper that is distributed free. It's a major newspaper, but it has a conservative bent, and so they took down all the posts. Now they've relented a little bit, but people in the Senate and Congress are upset. They want to take away the Section 230 exemption from liability that these big tech giants have, and they always hide behind. They say they're open platforms. Will be open if you make it impossible for people to sue us and give us protection from that. We will be open platforms, which is what they have said, and it's a big fat lie. So they subpoenaed them to Jack Dorsey, the head of Twitter, is being subpoenaed to come to a hearing at the Senate this week. Now, outside of the New York Post, it's almost impossible to find any story about Hunter Biden. It is like, do you remember the scene in the Ten Commandments where Pharaoh is saying, let the name Moses be stricken from every obelisk and monument? It's almost like that happened with Hunter Biden. So I did a search. I subscribe to the Washington Post and to the New York Times. So I get the full digital experience. So I thought, I'm going to look and see what is Hunter Biden. I'll just do a search on his first name. Was he mentioned at all in the New York Times over the past few days? Well, first I did the Washington Post, and this was my search result. In all publications, I found one reference to Hunter. The word was used in a crossword puzzle in the Washington Post magazine. That was a clue. Hunter. That was it. The great newspaper of record, the one that we're committed to the truth. Is they the one that have this phrase, truth dies in darkness? Okay, it died this week at the Washington Post. They won't even talk about it. And even the Biden campaign, by the way, is not denying that these emails are inauthentic. They're just saying, well, Trump's a bad guy. That's the response. Trump's a bad guy, too. This is the New York Times. I found one, well, there were a number of articles where Hunter was mentioned, but there was one where it mentioned Hunter Biden, and it said this, taking a stand, Facebook and Twitter drew a fresh wave of Republican ire last week, blocking and limiting the spread of a New York Post article that contained unsubstantiated rumors about Hunter Biden. So, the newspaper of record, they really did their homework there. This problem with truth, though, what's more troubling is the impact that it's had on the truth. As I mentioned, I talked to someone yesterday who's having a back and forth with some of the people in his denomination about Black Lives Matter and social justice, and I talked about that in my talk first hour last Sunday. This is a Barna Report that was released, I think, on October the 6th. American Worldview Inventory 2020. It looked at what evangelicals, they divided it into 4 categories: evangelicals, Pentecostals, charismatics, and Catholics, and what they believe on an inventory of about 51 beliefs. This is the summary of what Barna says. Barna surveyed 51 beliefs and behaviors among Christian groups and found that rather than transforming the culture around them with biblical truth, the opposite is happening. American Christianity is rapidly conforming to the values of the post-Christian secular culture. Key findings of the survey include this. Finding 1, evangelicals are embracing secularism. A majority, 52% of evangelicals reject absolute moral truth. Process that. 52% of self-identifying evangelicals reject absolute moral truth. 61% do not read the Bible on a daily basis. 75% believe that people are basically good. I mentioned this to Charles before he spoke this morning. He said, if they 75% believe that, I don't want to misquote you, Charles, you said, that's like, how can they call themselves evangelical? The study found that 1/3 to 1/2 of evangelicals in the survey embrace a variety of beliefs and behaviors counter to biblical teaching and long-standing evangelical beliefs. Pentecostals and charismatics take secularization a step further. Over two-thirds reject absolute moral truth. 54% are unwilling to define human life as sacred, with half claiming the Bible is ambiguous in its teaching about abortion. And 69% say they prefer socialism to capitalism. A full 45% did not qualify as born-again Christians. Mainline Protestants are the most secular. 60% of them have beliefs that directly conflict with biblical teaching. 3 key values define this group. Truth and morality are relative. Life has no inherent value or purpose, so individuals should pursue personal happiness or satisfaction. And traditional religious practices are no longer seen as central or essential to their Christian faith. And this is what we see. Some of these, Steve Mitchell and I met because of concerns about this coming into the evangelical church. And it hasn't stopped. We've tried to stand firm. I think we have stood firm against this here. We certainly tried to do that. But this is just shocking. And while some of the ideas, Barna says, gaining traction in evangelical congregations may not reflect a majority perspective, the fact that 1/3 to 1/2 of those adults embrace these ideas can be viewed as alarming for evangelicalism. Those beliefs and behaviors include this. 48% believe a person who is good enough or does enough good works can earn eternal salvation. 44% do not believe that history is the unfolding narrative of God's reality. 44% claim the Bible is ambiguous about abortion. 43% maintain that when Jesus was on earth, he sent. 43% do not believe there is a common God-given purpose to humanity. Um, 36% prefer socialism to capitalism. Here's a chart that's in the thing. Now, the percentages here, you can find, just look up Barna Report, Arizona Christian University, Worldview Inventory, 2020, and you can get the PDF and read it. But here's a chart in the report. It's only about 8 pages long. The percentages in the columns there are people who reject the principle at the left, okay? So it says here, people are not basically good, we are sinners. Among evangelicals, 75% reject that. Which faith you embrace, number 2, matters as much or more than simply having some faith. Rejected by 62% of evangelicals, 84% of Catholics. Down here in the middle, there are absolute moral truths that apply to everyone all the time. 52% of evangelicals reject that. 69% of Pentecostals, 69% of Catholics. And Barna does a very good job of his surveys. Here's some of the others. Human life is sacred. 40% of evangelicals reject that. The Bible is the Word of God. Is trustworthy and reliable. 26% of evangelicals reject. 63% of mainline, and 53% of Catholics. That's the American Worldview Inventory 2020, Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. Shocking. Well, now the good news, that was the good news part of this morning's update. Now let's just look at the Middle East and see some of the things that are going on there. Again, it's an incredible week. We could talk about this forever, but I'll try to keep this to about 10 or 15 minutes. One of the things that is growing out of the Abraham Accords are developing at least more public relationships between Israel and its Middle Eastern neighbors, the Arab countries. So right now there are negotiations that are going on between Israel and Lebanon about their border. The border's not well defined. There is a border there. We drove along it a few years ago, all the way across from Tel Dan, all the way across to the Mediterranean. And there's a border there, and there's a fence, but that's not necessarily the agreed upon border. That's where they kind of put their stakes in the ground after the Lebanon War back in 2006. But so they're negotiating that, and there's also dispute about, because there's a dispute about the land border, there's also dispute about the territory where they can get resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is a big deal because there are some significant gas and oil resources there that Lebanon is claiming that they're entitled to. So the Lebanese newspaper that's pro-Hezbollah says, negotiations without legitimacy. But they are talking. Hezbollah is objecting. The interesting thing that happened, though, was when they went to the talks, this is the report from the Jerusalem Post, Lebanese team snubs Israelis as maritime border talks begin. And these are being pushed by the U.S. There is also a push. Mike Pompeo met with the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia in Washington this week. They did a joint news conference, and there's always this question, what's the next country that's going to come in under these Abraham Accords? We have the United Arab Emirates, we have Bahrain. Is it going to be Oman? Is it going to be somebody else? What about the Saudis? That's what everybody's looking at. What about the Saudis? What about the Saudis? So Pompeo and the Trump administration is pushing the Saudis to come into some kind of normalization. Israel has publicly said that they want the Saudis to come in. This is an article from the Gatestone Institute noting that Saudi Arabia did come out. I played the clips of the Prince Bandar, who was the ambassador to the United States for a long time, saying, that the Palestinians are corrupt, they're bad. The Israelis have problems, but the Palestinians have been corrupt and not made any progress. The Israelis, we don't think they've done the right thing, but they've made progress. They've improved themselves. But there is a tremendous amount of corruption. If you go up into the West Bank, what's called the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, you go out around Ramallah, you go around the ancient Tel, where the ancient city of Ai was, that was destroyed in the conquest led by Joshua, you will see homes like Beverly Hills. This is in the Palestinian area. And you can stand there on Mount Gerizim overlooking Shechem, and you can see a refugee camp, but you can also turn around and look the other direction and see one of the most magnificent homes anywhere in the world. It's a Palestinian home. They're also, by the way, there was a report they're bringing refugees back to Yarmouk, which is a refugee camp in Syria. It's one of them. It was a horrible place, worse than any refugee camp in Israel. But it's been like that in Syria for over 70 years in an Arab country. And they have the audacity to go complain about Israel. So the Saudi foreign minister did a little conference with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy And I'm going to play a clip of him. This is what he said. Well, you'll see some of the questions, sort of his first opening statement, and then some questions that he answers. It's about 3.5 minutes, I think.
The kingdom has always been at the forefront of efforts to bring peace and security to the Middle East and to secure a just and comprehensive resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Over the years, Saudi Arabia has put forward peace proposals created to achieve and protect the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people and the security of the people of Israel and Palestine. That has been and remains our goal. And we continue to work with our partners to find a lasting peaceful resolution. And so we welcome the recent efforts to bring the parties together towards a comprehensive peace plan, because an important step in securing regional stability in the Middle East remains a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. All other things will follow from that. And that is possible if we continue to talk to come together with common goal of settlement that works for all parties. But negotiation requires partners on both sides of the table. Settlement can only occur when there are partners in the process, partners willing to talk in good faith, putting some interests aside, and committed to the fundamental health and security of all parties.
I'd like to turn to another issue that you raised in your talk, and that concerned the Arab-Israeli peace process. Reading between the lines, I've spent too many years focusing on this. Reading between the lines of your remarks, you said, I believe, that all these things about progress will follow from a Palestinian-Israeli agreement, which sounded like a reaffirmation of the Arab Peace Initiative, whose basic principle is all Arab and Muslim majority states will make full peace with Israel the day after, essentially, the day after an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement, which a model which has been, shall we say, challenged by recent events of the UAE and the Bahrain agreements to have full normal relations with Israel. Now, your government has taken some steps. It has congratulated and welcomed these other countries' moves, permitting overflights between those countries and Israel. Can you imagine more incremental steps down that path as an interim stage before a final peace arrangement? Are there more interim steps like that to be had?
I believe that the focus now needs to be on getting the Palestinians and the Israelis back to the negotiating table. In the end, the only thing that can deliver lasting peace and lasting stability is an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. If we don't manage to achieve that, we will continue to have that festering wound in the region. We are committed to the process of peace. Peace, we see, is a strategic necessity for the region. Part of that is an eventual normalization with Israel, as envisioned in the Arab peace plan, as envisioned even in what the kingdom proposed in 1981 in Fez. So we have always envisioned that a normalization would happen. But we also need to have a Palestinian state, and we need to have a Palestinian and Israeli peace plan. Therefore, we strongly believe that the focus now should be on getting the Palestinians and the Israelis to the table. And I believe everybody is committed to trying to find a way to achieve that.
And is it your view that the Emiratis and Bahrainis made that more likely or less likely by the steps that they've taken with Israel?
So the Emirati and the Bahraini deal, one of the things they delivered is taking annexation at least off the table for the time being, which was a significant threat to the prospects for peace. So I think that, if you look at it from that context, it does help lay the groundwork for potentially the Israelis and the Palestinians getting back to the table. More work needs to be done, but you can look at it as a positive in that context.
Would you welcome other Arab states, if not Saudi Arabia, taking those sorts of steps, that is, moving toward normal relations with Israel in exchange for Israel taking certain measures with the Palestinians?
The states will have to decide what they think is in the best interest of them and the cause that they believe in.
Can I ask you about a fascinating set of interviews that were delivered just recently by...
Well, he asked some questions about what Prince Bandar had said, the interviews that I played last week, which I may not have been clear. When I was reading the subtitles, the closed caption titles, and not saying, I need to retire, I'm retiring, and I need to be truthful now. Unfortunately, some people that listened to the update said, you're retiring and you need to be truthful now, and they were a little bit concerned about that, but it was probably, they didn't understand I was reading the caption titles, and that's okay. It's just that it happens, but I'm not retiring from doing this, but anyway, I know they can hear the moans. Oh no, he's not. But so they talked about that, and Prince Faisal said, well, that's Prince Bandar's opinion. We don't necessarily share it. But you notice in the background there was a picture of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, then King Salman, and then King Abdullah. Now, King Abdullah is gone. King Salman is not in the best of health. And I think that Prince Faisal's response in some respects was a show of respect to King Salman's position. But when King Salman is gone, I would think that the Saudi position could change very quickly. Prince Faisal said, we could be at this stage for 5 years or more before there's normalization. But we know that things change very quickly in this world. Have you noticed that over the last few months? So just understand that there is going to be a change, I think, in the Saudi view on normalization. But King Salman is, I think, holding to the position of the Arab Peace Initiative, which was done back in 2001 or 2002, out of respect for his brothers who had been kings and preceded him. I don't think Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will be as bound to what has gone on in the past. That's just my particular opinion. But the Palestinians again show that they are quite capable of as Abba Eban, the UN ambassador of Israel, said the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And so here they are accusing Gulf visitors, from Muslim, Arab, Gulf visitors who've come to Israel to go to the Temple Mount. They are accusing them of desecrating the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There was a group of 9 from the United Arab Emirates, and the Palestinians, when they talked about it, said they were storming the mosque, which is what they say when 10 Jewish people, 10 Jewish Israelis go up there. So they are completely unhinged. They still don't get it. They are totally corrupt and bankrupt. And then yesterday there was this initial flights from Tel Aviv to Bahrain, and they're having a ceremony today, I believe, to sign up their normalization agreement. There's been a real change. There's a report out from Zogby Research. Zogby is an Arab American, a very pro-Arab, talking about the annexation debate and looked at attitudes in Israel and the key Arab states. Again, if you just look for the annexation debate in Zogby in Google, you will get this report. It shows that there has been a change in Arab thought towards Israel. For example, here are how important is that there be a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And you can see that from very important to somewhat important, the vast majority of each of these countries, Egypt, Jordan, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Palestine, believe that it is very important. One of the other attitudes they talked about, at this point, in your opinion, how likely is it some Arab states will develop normalized relations with Israel, even without peace between Israel and the Palestinians? And the response to this is rather shocking. For example, Egypt, 69% of people think that normalization can occur without an Israeli-Palestinian peace arrangement. Jordan, 75%. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, 71%. United Arab Emirates, 75%. And even in Palestinian areas, it was 55%. And some, like in the United Arab Emirates, even think that it's desirable to have a peace agreement even without, or normalization with Israel even without a peace agreement. I really would like to spend a lot of time. I think this is a very important article from Barry Weiss. She was a reporter. She's I would call her center or center left in her political orientation. She was a writer with the New York Times, and she resigned. I talked about this. She resigned from the New York Times a few months ago because she just said she's Jewish, the anti-Semitism among people at the New York Times it just was intolerable, and she quit. She did the right thing. She has an article on the new issue of the Tablet called "Stop Being Shocked. American liberalism is in danger from a new ideology, one with dangerous implications for Jews." So I guess what I would do is I would sort of give her the honor of being the guest prophecy updater this week because of what she said. Because if you look down through here, for example, AOC refused to go to an event honoring the birth date of Yitzhak Rabin. And a lot of people in the American Jewish community were like, well, why would she do that? Did she just not understand how important it was? Perhaps having previously admitted that she was not the expert in geopolitics on this issue, she didn't know who Rabin was. That had to be it. Or maybe it was the fault of the Jewish community. Surely if she was introduced to the stable of Harat's columnists, she'd come around. After all, didn't AOC say she had Sephardic heritage? Did she not realize it was Mandy Patinkin, International Rescue Committee ambassador, who was hosting the event? She must not have understood. Surely there must have been some confusion, some miscommunication, some mix-up. And to her credit, I give her tremendous credit for this, she said, but it wasn't AOC who was mixed up. The savvy politician had read the room and was sending a clear signal about who belongs in the new progressive coalition and who does not. The confusion, and there seems to be a good deal of it these days, is among American Jews who think that by submitting to ever-changing loyalty tests, they can somehow maintain the old status quo in their place inside of it. She says this, did you see that the Ethical Cultural Fieldstone School hosted a speaker that equated Israelis with Nazis? Did you know that Brearley is now asking families to write a statement demonstrating their commitment to anti-racism? Did you see that Chelsea Handler tweeted a clip of Louis Farrakhan? Did you see that protesters tagged a synagogue in Kenosha with Free Palestine graffiti? Did you hear about the march in D.C. where they chanted, Israel, we know you, you murder children too? Did you hear the Biden campaign apologize to Linda Sarsour after initially disavowing her? Did you see Twitter suspended Brett Weinstein's civic organization, but still allows the Iranian Ayatollah to openly promote genocide of the Jewish people? Did you see that the mayor, Bill de Blasio, scapegoated the Jewish community for the spread of COVID in New York while defending mass protests on the grounds that this is a historic moment of change? By the way, there's a giant women's march in Washington, D.C. yesterday. Go look at the pictures of it. Then, like I did a search for Hunter at the New York Times and Washington Post and found essentially nothing. Go see if they're saying anything about it being a super spreading event, like they say about the Sturgis motorcycle rally or any of President Trump's rallies. She goes on down there, she goes, you know, we used to be liberals. She goes, I was a liberal. I didn't even know it. My worldview had a name because it was baked into everything I came into contact with. My parents' worldviews, the schools they sent me to, the synagogues we attended, the magazines and newspapers we read. I was among millions of Americans constituted by these ideals. I mean, Hollywood studios, labor unions, cultural venues, museums, think tanks, everybody was aligned with these principles. And she says this is a very important article. No longer American liberalism is under siege. There is a new ideology vying to replace it. No one has yet decided what the name of the force that has come to unseat liberalism. Some say it's social justice. Author Rod Dreher called it the therapeutic totalitarianism. Wesley Yang refers to it as the successor ideology, as a successor to liberalism. At some point, it will have a formal name, one that properly describes its mixture of, this is a Jewish woman, center to center left, in her politics. This is what she says. At some point, it will have a formal name, one that properly describes its mixture of postmodernism, postcolonialism, identity politics, neo-Marxism, critical race theory, intersectionality, and the therapeutic mentality. Until then, it is up to each of us to see it plainly. We need to look past the hashtags and slogans and the jargon to assess it honestly and then explain it to others. Now, I applaud her for saying this. I really do. Because what she says is, at the core of it is anti-Semitism and hatred of Jews. The beating heart of this new ideology is critical race theory. Legal scholar Angela Harris put it concisely in her foreword to critical race theory. Quote, unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. And here what's happening. Go read it. Tablet, Barry Weiss, Stop Being Shocked. One of the more important articles I've seen, just because I largely agree with her. It's what a lot of us have seen. A lot of us have talked about it last Sunday. It's infusing the church. The church is more knowledgeable about critical race theory and social justice warriors and intersectionality than it is about the basic truths of the scriptures and the Word of God. Survey after survey after survey shows it. We're not, my view, I've always viewed the great apostasy that's coming as like a giant bucket of garbage pail. And it's filling up. It's filling up. It's filling up. And eventually it overflows and you have a mini tsunami of it. So it's not coming. It's here. The question is, how much of this garbage bucket needs to be filled up before it overflows and wipes out what we understood Christianity to be? Because the Bible says it's coming. I use 2 Timothy 4 every week. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, the great falling away, the rebellion. And it's here. Let's see, should I go into... I have about 20 slides of President Erdogan. And I will exercise mercy and not play this. I will reference you to a great article at Gatestone Institute. Erdogan declares war on Arabs. And it goes back, I played part of this before last week. This was a speech he gave to the new parliament in Turkey back in on October the 1st. And essentially what he says is, and this thing is, some countries in our region did not exist yesterday, and they may not exist in the future, but God willing, we will continue to raise our flag in this region forever. And he is just Mr. Propaganda. For example, there's this ship that's a drilling ship, and it's titled Fatih, F-A-T-I-H. Here's Erdogan yesterday, sitting on the ship and getting a tour. Fatih, by the way, I'm not sure how you say it, okay? But that is a reference to Istanbul. That is the name of the ship. And there's been a lot of things that are happening in Turkey. For example, this is a tweet from a former member of Erdogan's party that he tweeted this the end of August, early September. This is a map. Here's a little better picture of it. This is a map that is circulating in Turkey about areas that they want to take over. Do you see what's happening with Syria and Iraq? Foreign Policy mentioned this a few years ago. I put the clip up there. By the way, look at some of the other areas that are red. All of Cyprus. Also looks like it's red in Athens, doesn't it? And a large chunk of Greece. Bulgaria. Macedonia. So this is the way Erdogan rolls, and this is a big issue. He's trying to reinstate the caliphate, and I'll make one reference to one more article. A very good article in the Financial Times the other day called Strongmen Battle for Supremacy. And it has a picture of Middle Eastern and, well, people messing around in the Middle East, 3 strong men. And who are they? Erdogan of Turkey, Putin of Russia, and Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. Now it says here they have a lot in common. They agree on a lot of things, and they do. They agree on a lot of things, but they're coming into conflict. So Russia and Turkey are getting it into Syria and Libya, but they still have a common cause that unites them. And that's the point of this. So even though they have these different things, this is Erdogan, this is another speech. This guy gives so many speeches. This one was 2 hours long. And you don't need to turn up the sound, but because it's all in Turkish. But if you notice, the important thing to notice is the images that he uses. So here, what's he using here? Hagia Sophia. You know, by most estimates, the greatest church in Christendom, the history of Christendom. And he's talking, well, we took it over. He also has things here. This is that was the tower at the new Istanbul airport, which is, I know they're having economic problems, but the new Istanbul airport is the largest airport on planet Earth. Do you understand this? And a lot of us have been talking about watch Turkey, and a lot of people say, don't worry about Turkey. I'm saying is you should worry about Turkey. In addition to that, in Istanbul, I think the next thing that shows up, and it's a very odd shape, this tower. I talked about it when it was, I don't know how many, I can't remember when I talked about it. It was a while back. Their COVID response, he's talking about how great it is, and traveling. And I think the next thing you're going to see is sort of an overview of the great canal that he wants to build to sort of parallel the Bosphorus from the Black Sea down to the Aegean Sea. So he's got all these massive building projects. It's like I've never seen a propaganda campaign like this guy does to couch everything in terms of what he wants to accomplish. Turkey is very important to watch. I think this is the canal. But this one, I think this one was 2 hours and 13 minutes. So don't complain about my updates. It is, So the takeaway from today is this. We are now in a truth lockdown in the world. And you got to dig to find out the truth. Because you're not going to get it from very many outlets. And so the next few weeks are going to be few months are going to be very disconcerting. I pray the election goes the right way. Ultimately, I know that God is in control, but I think that we need to be prepared for increasing persecution of Christians, people losing their YouTube channels, and worse and worse. It's not that we want that, it's just that the early church thrived under it. God will protect us. And may we do everything that we do and have to God's glory. That's what we should be oriented towards. Not our comfort, but doing and acting in a way for God's glory. So let's remember that. So Father, we just pray that you will give us strength, guide us by your Holy Spirit, and help us to stand firm in a difficult time. And as the Apostle Paul says, that we would act like men and stand firm. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.